Welcome. Can I get that turned down a little bit? How are we doing? Does that sound better? Okay. All right. Well, welcome everybody, and thank you for being here today. We're going to get started. I'm going to introduce myself for those of you who don't know me. I'm Jessica Hutchinson, principal of Vintage High School, and soon we'll be hearing from our very special guest, alumna and NASA astronaut Dr. Kate Rubins. But first, we have a few brief reminders and some introductions of special guests. So students, I have a reminder and an ask about cell phones. I'm actually going to ask you to take out your cell phones right now if you have one, and we need you to turn it to airplane mode so that it doesn't interfere with our LCD projector or any of the other frequencies and waves that we need. Also, if you haven't already, could you please turn it to silent or vibrate? And a reminder that we have a lot of special guests here today. This is a great opportunity. So once you put your phone away after it's on airplane mode and silent, please don't take it out again. You can take a photo, but we don't want you watching videos or messaging anybody during this very special presentation. Okay, thank you for doing that. And then I'll keep introducing our guests. We have a lot of special guests in our front row. First, I'd like to introduce Josh Schultz, who is our Napa County Office of Education Deputy Superintendent. Thank you for being here. And Rosanna Musetti, our NVUSD Superintendent. Thank you for being here. We also have Lisa Chu, our NVUSD Trustee for Area 2. Welcome. And we're honored to have Stan Smart here. He was Kate's principal during the time she was here, former principal of Vintage High School. And we also have Ted and Sue Migdal here. Ted was Kate's science teacher and department chair of the science department when she was a student here. Sue, his wife, is a former NVUSD employee. Thank you all for being here today. Now I have the pleasure of introducing Newton Thomas. Many of you know Mr. Thomas. He's our English teacher and English department lead, but you may not know that he was also Kate's journalism teacher when she was a student here. So Mr. Thomas, if you want to come up for a second.
This is going to be tricky because I didn't know that I was going to have to be holding a microphone and reading at the same time, which is kind of pushing the limits of my skill set. Welcome, everyone. It's inspiring to see so many familiar faces here to welcome and celebrate Kate. And coming up with a few words is normally not, as most of my students will certainly attest. But coming up with a few words about Kate poses some unique challenges. First, she was my student a while ago. Okay, a significant while ago. Indeed, a significantly long while ago. Thinking of today, I was initially tempted to go down the rabbit hole of just how long ago. When ago, exactly? Suffice it to say that when Kate was editor-in-chief of the High School newspaper, Taylor Swift was in kindergarten. The iPhone was still a decade away. So it's been a minute, apparently. Then I was tempted, as many English teachers might be, to explore endless puns relating to Kate's soaring, her flying, her blasting off, her finding other sublime orbits, her fulfilling astronomical dreams amongst the celestial bodies, her leaving Earth's atmosphere to embark on some stratospheric quest for whatever. You get the idea. But no, for me, it comes back to Kate. Not to corny puns, not to goofy timelines that we well-seasoned folk find fascinating. I returned to Kate as a high school senior back in the day, back in P4, working on deadline for the Vintage Times, using whatever Jurassic version of a Macintosh or Apple PowerBook we may have used to lay out the entire issue, squinting, scrolling, perhaps still then mildly mesmerized by the genius of spell check. late nights, real deadlines, real commitment. I suspected and knew then, of course, that Kate was brilliant, dedicated, and driven. And as I think will be quite clear momentarily, Kate is still brilliant, still dedicated, still driven. For me to draw the line from the Kate I knew as a high school senior to the Kate we celebrate this morning is simply a blessing beyond words. To have known you then and to introduce you now seems an almost unfair privilege, but I'll take it. Simply put, my heart is full. And Kate, it's truly a joy and wonder to have you back here at Vintage.
Thank you, Mr. Thomas. Before we begin, I have one more special guest to introduce, and I also just want to thank a few organizations and people today. In your programs, there are many people listed, and this was truly a collaboration to have Dr. Kate Rubins here today, and I just want to give recognition to Napa County Office of Education, and especially to Shauna Wagner, who led that effort, and all the details of organizing, and many other people there. Many people in NBUSD, many departments and individual staff, and certainly many staff and departments here at Vintage as well. But if you can all help me in recognizing, and if you see them later today, our custodial staff, and led by Pedro Lara, our lead custodian, for the work to get this all ready for today. So thank you for that. And we have one last guest, Dr. Barb Nemko. She's the superintendent of Napa County Office of Education, and she's not able to be here today. She's on the East Coast, but she was integral in making this happen. So if you please help me, and we'll watch this video welcome message and introduction of Dr. Kate Rubins. Thank you.
Good morning. I'm Barbara Nemko, Napa County Superintendent of Schools. 27 years ago, Dr. Kate Rubins could have been sitting in this very theater, possibly in the seat you are currently occupying. She was probably thinking then about graduating from high school, this high school. After she graduated from Vintage, she earned a Bachelor of Science from UC San Diego and a PhD from Stanford in cancer biology. She did extensive research in HIV and infectious diseases and headed a team of 14 researchers studying stuff that's so complicated I can barely say it, let alone explain it. In 2009, she was selected as one of 9 astronauts in the 20th NASA astronaut class. She's made 2 trips to the International Space Station. She's logged more than 300 days in space. She did 4 spacewalks, and they don't just stroll around out there. They're fixing things while they're doing spacewalks. She's conducted more than 275 science experiments and was the first person to sequence DNA in space. If that wasn't enough, she's been selected to be part of the Artemis project and go to the moon. All of us at the Napa County Office of Education are thrilled that she accepted our invitation to come back to Napa to speak to you today and to the community tonight at Napa Valley College. Dr. Rubins has shown that with very hard work, determination, and focus, you can do something extraordinary in the future. Please join me in welcoming our favorite NASA astronaut and Napa hometown girl, who has truly soared to unimaginable heights, Dr. Kate Rubins.
Hi. Thank you all for that fantastic introduction. Thank you, Mr. Thomas. Thank you very much for hosting me, Vintage High, and Napa County. I'm really looking forward to talking to you all today. So I was a student, right, sitting right where you're sitting, probably thinking about graduation, maybe also thinking about lunch too. So I'm not going to stand in between you and your lunchtime too much. But I did want to talk to you a little bit about my experience in space and give you a flavor of what it's like to launch a space, to be on space station. And then I want to talk a little bit about the science and the innovation that we do. So if we have the video that we could play, that would be awesome. So I'm going to take you right to launch day. So at this point, we've already been training for 2.5 years. We've gotten with our crew. We've been doing extensive training all over the world, and this is the morning of launch. So I launched out of Baikonur, Kazakhstan, halfway around the world. In the middle of the night, we get up with our crew and we go out to a building where we're going to get suited up in our spacesuits. And this is really critical because these suits protect us if the capsule depressurizes. So this is our life here when we're putting these suits on. And we've done this a lot before in training, but on the morning of launch, I had this thought in my mind that said, I'm taking this spacesuit into space. This is the day. It's something that you almost can't quite believe is happening to you. We walk out, the sun's risen already, and we walk out and we report to the commission, who certifies us as the astronauts that are able to get on that vehicle and ride to space. So this is our last glimpse of Earth right here on this ladder. And then we climb up, we get in an elevator, and we ride this entire rocket to the top where we're going to get in the capsule. As we're riding up, we can see the whole stack of the rocket and know that we're going to go get on top of that. Inside the capsule, it's pretty crowded. This is a really small, compact area. And you can feel it when that rocket flies off. It's like nothing I've ever experienced. So this ride is only 9 minutes long to get to space. Can you believe it? It is a maximum speed of 17,500 miles an hour. We're going just short of Mach 25. There's a bunch of stages in the rocket, and then we are at some point almost, amazingly so, orbiting the Earth. So the solar rays come out, and we had about 3 days where it was just our small spacecraft orbiting the Earth until we were approaching the International Space Station. This is the most complex machine humans have ever built in space. It's beautiful. It's about the size of a football field end to end. And so we dock our spacecraft with this space station, and we're able to open the hatch and fly inside the space station after just 3 days of getting there. And I was pretty excited. I'd been there already. This was my second trip to space. And I got a chance to meet my crewmates who were up there already. So we fly in these staggered crews. And so I got to see 3 people that I hadn't seen for over 4 months in training. And they welcomed us to the space station, to our new home for the next 6 months. Living in space is pretty amazing. It's a combination of really ordinary things combined with the absolutely beautiful views. A lot of the stuff that we're doing when we're living in space is science. We're there to do science experiments. So you can see this is a lab experiment I was doing, but in space you have to be a little bit like MacGyver and be very inventive. So some of the things that we were doing, for example, we mentioned DNA sequencing in space, and I'll talk about that a little bit more, is completely different from how you would do things on Earth, because everything is floating, right? So we have to figure out a way that we're going to do all of these science and technology experiments, but we're doing them in microgravity. So I said, everything's floating. You're floating. Everything around you is floating. And you have to figure out how you're going to stick stuff to the lab bench. Like I said, sometimes it can be really low-tech solutions, like the gray tape, the duct tape that we bought at Home Depot. This keeps our lab equipment from flying away. So a lot of experiments, and I'll talk about this a little bit later, a lot of things we're doing are looking at things like what happens to the human body in space. How do we change and adapt when we're all of a sudden floating and we're getting to this completely unique environment? What happens to other biological systems in space? We study things like what happens to fluids, combustion, all of these kinds of processes that would work one way on Earth. We need to figure out how they're working in microgravity. And so one of the ways that we get all of these supplies for scientific experiments is these visiting vehicles. So these don't have people on them, but they bring cargo from the Earth. And you can see just how many different kinds of visiting vehicles we get to the space station. So these vehicles are launched from Japan, they're launched from Russia, they're launched from the US. They bring us all of our supplies and our equipment to do these really critical scientific experiments. They also dock to the station, and then our job is to unload about 7,000 tons of cargo. So as you can imagine, this takes a little while. You got to figure out where you put everything and not lose track of anything. And since I lose my keys on a fairly regular basis, this is a help for me. But this is one of the coolest things as when you're watching this vehicle come to the space station. And we are, as the astronauts on the other end, we're controlling the robotic arm that grapples them. One of the other tasks that we do besides putting cargo away and a lot of science is a spacewalk. So this is my crewmates and I getting ready for a spacewalk. We are in the suits for about 11 hours total. We spend 4 hours getting ready to depressurize the airlock. And then we exit the airlock and we are floating outside the space station. And this is one of those things you can get used to space. You can get used to being inside, but you can never get used to that feeling of hanging onto a handrail and looking down at Earth and having nothing keeping you from the planet except this little tether that's attached to you. As I said, the space station is huge. We translate around the space station using our arms because this is the best way to get around in space. The legs are kind of useless when you're floating. It gets a little tense. I will tell you, some of the scariest moments in my life have been on a spacewalk. It's up to you and your buddy. So you go out there, you always have a partner. That was my buddy Suichi. We did a spacewalk together. But the two of you are relying on each other to keep each other safe, to help each other if there's any problems with your equipment, and to rescue the other person. This is one of the really big lessons that I learned, is that you go to space and it's not just you doing your experiment. You're part of a team and you're part of a crew. And so you guys can look around at your classmates and you have your friend groups and you've got people that are in your classes, and you can think about that as your crew. These are the people that you rely on to do things like an incredibly difficult job like spacewalking. We were able to repair a few pieces of equipment while we were out there, and we set up a base to install some giant solar arrays on the space station. So we have solar arrays, but we're upgrading the technology. So these arrays are going to help us keep the space station going for another 10 years. So after 11 hours, we get to come back inside. The first thing you really want to do is get that helmet off and eat a good dinner. It's the best feeling ever. Another thing that we get a chance to do is photography. So we're on the space station, we're orbiting the Earth every 90 minutes. And so we have this amazing vantage point. We can actually help out in natural disasters. So there's a worldwide network. And if there's floods in Bangladesh or earthquakes in California, we can get our cameras and go over those sites, and we can actually take photos to help out with humanitarian crises. We can also use this for science. We're able to observe our planet. And so because we can observe the planet over time, we can look at changes. So we have studies that are looking at glaciers on the southern tip of South Africa. We have studies that are looking out into space. And we have studies, things about our Earth's atmosphere, identification of weather features, and an assessment of how our planet is changing. And all of this is available to us in this beautiful little room on the space station called the cupola. I spent an awful lot of time there. I would just spend 90 minutes and fly around the planet if I could. Unfortunately, all of this has to come to an end at some point, right? We stay up there for 6 months, and it's a bittersweet day. We have to say goodbye to our crewmates. These are our space brothers and sisters. We've been with them training for 2.5 years and 6 months in space. And we get in our spacecraft and we close the capsule hatch. And then all of a sudden we're back down to 3 people. So our tiny little spacecraft undocks from the space station. It orbits the Earth once, and we fire our deorbit engines. And once we fire those, we land back on the planet 33 minutes later. It's exactly 33 minutes because of orbital mechanics, and maybe you can work that out in your math classes. I can't. But it's a ride. So we go through this plasma fireball, and then we get the parachutes coming out, and that slows our descent rate. So you get this completely charred capsule that has been through essentially the inside of the sun on the way back to Earth, followed by the landing, which some people will say happy soft landing because it's anything but. We land out in the middle of the desert with nobody around, and then the search and rescue forces come out and pick us up. So you can see here, I'm seeing the first humans that I had seen besides my crewmate in 6 months. And I was really, really happy to see them. And then I landed back on Earth safe. We all happened to still be alive, Nobody was injured, and I knew I was going to get a chance to see my family and friends soon. It's an incredible journey. It takes a huge number of people to make this possible, but the benefits that we get from studying our Earth, from looking out into the cosmos, and from doing all of the scientific exploration, I think really makes it worth it. So you guys are thinking about what you want to do in life and what you want to do in your career. And I'm a scientist, right? I was a total nerd in high school. Mr. Thomas can attest to this. And it's great. If you're a nerd now, you're going to do awesome in life later. Don't worry about it. So I've got a little presentation. I want to just show you a few of the kind of science and technology things that we're working on at NASA. And if you're not a scientist or somebody who's interested in technology, don't worry, because we got to do a lot of other things to get to space. For example, I had to learn Russian in order to go to space because we cooperate with the Russians. So I had to learn. I spent 10 years learning a language. Russian is really hard. I had to learn how to talk and communicate with people from different cultures. So if you're interested in international relations, we have to learn how to get to. This is an international endeavor. So all these countries are going to space: Japan, Europe, Canada, most European nations in the US. And we all have to get together and we have to work out how we're going to do this incredibly complex project. There's a place in space exploration for artists, for poetry. You saw the photography that we got a chance to do on Space Station. That communicates our journey to space and the beauty of the Earth better than anything I could possibly imagine. And so we've sent a few people to space who are pilots and highly technical specialists. But as we start sending more and more people to space, there's going to be a place for all of the different kinds of things that you could imagine doing in your career. So I'm going to talk about science and technology and just give you a little bit of a flavor of the kinds of experiments that we do on the space station. So you see the sitting in the capsule, surrounded by all of the cargo that you can possibly imagine, and a lot of this is the scientific experiments. We basically have one way to get these to space. This is the business end of the rocket. And there we go. So when we think about what we're going to do in space, all of the science and the technology, we need to figure out how to make it in a small portable package that we can launch from the Earth, because you saw we don't have a lot of room. This is our laboratory. This is one of the most beautiful places I've ever seen. It's incredible, but it's really a complex technological and an engineering marvel. And so we're trying to figure out both how do humans even live and work in space, as well as how to do these scientific experiments on board the space station. So you can see we have some experiments that we do outside. We use spacewalks to install experiments. This is an experiment that was actually looking at different kinds of materials that you could use when you're building a satellite. And we don't know what happens to some of these materials in space. So it gets bombarded by radiation, right? We've got things like solar wind. We have temperature extremes between -200 and +200 every 90 minutes. So these materials are seeing some of the most extreme conditions we could possibly imagine. And we want to test them in space to make sure the satellites are working, to make sure that when you turn on your Google Maps, you have GPS, because it would be terrible if the satellite stopped working. So all of these things it's something that you don't necessarily think about, how space tech touches your life, but everything that you do, everything on your phone, everything that you think about in modern life, a lot of it is derived from some of these technologies that we started working on in the 1960s. So I want to just talk about 4 quick examples. So first, what does water look like in space? So water forms a sphere in space. And this is my friend Chris Hatfield behind a water bubble demonstrating this. So when we have a drink bag, which is a bag with a straw in it, we release that water from the straw and it forms these spheres. And you can get bigger and bigger and bigger. And this is sort of like a risk proposition. How big do you get this water bubble before it like explodes on your face or goes and hits some really important equipment that NASA gets mad at you about? Close personal friend of mine. So this water is amazing. So it forms a sphere, right, without a container to hold it, because it's in microgravity and it's suspended. As soon as it touches something, it adheres to it. And so this force of surface tension takes over everything when we're dealing with fluids in space. And as human beings, we are mostly water. So one of our questions was, these changes in fluid, how does that affect human physiology? And what we really wanted to study was the heart. So the cardiovascular system is constantly pumping blood, right? When you go into microgravity, all of those fluids shift up towards your head. The heart actually changes shape. It becomes a little bit more spherical, like that ball of water. And we know that there's risks to astronauts with blood clotting. We actually have reverse blood flow in our jugular vein. So for all these reasons, we wanted to study heart cells in space. But we had an issue, right? Everything floats. How do you keep these heart cells in this medium of water contained? So we designed some special containers here where we can actually have little wells that keep the heart cells together. We were able to launch these from Earth. They survived the launch loads. We brought a microscope up to space station so that we could actually visualize these heart cells. And we were able to put them in chambers and suspend them between two posts. So this is actually heart tissue. It's human heart tissue that's not just the muscle cells, but it's all of the other cells that surround the heart. And we could see them beating in space. This is really cool. This was pretty amazing. And we learned a lot about how these heart cells behave in microgravity just from this experiment alone. So next, I want to talk about things like miniaturize and simplify, right? We all love our phones. Like, I get anxious when I'm away from my phone for too long. But this technology has come from technology that used to take up the size of rooms. And so a lot of our technological advances are when we are in a situation where we have to make something work that's not ideal. You can have a room-sized computer, but it's a lot more helpful if it's a laptop. And space is a forcing function for that. So because we have to turn these giant things into smaller packages to launch them, this is an actual example of spaceflight hardware. This is our life support rack. You can see how much room this takes up in the space station and how heavy this was to launch off of Earth. So we're using technology to figure out how to make this life support system smaller and smaller. We're doing things like water recycling on the space station. We have a 97% closed loop water recycling. So we are able to take, we don't ship water up from Earth. We're able to take all of our water and we purify it constantly. It does mean that the coffee that you drank yesterday is going to turn into the coffee that you drink tomorrow. And you can picture how that happens. So we really want this technology to be working well, but we also want to make it smaller and portable and miniaturized. You can see we have some creative solutions sometimes, like the duct tape and how we're going to get things to happen in space. And we put these all together and we were able to come up with, this system is called tissue chips. And so we were able to come up with a small system that uses fluids and pumping and has an organ on a chip. So each little well in there has got heart cells or liver cells or lung cells. We can actually replicate the human body. So we're using these in space to understand human physiology. We can use them to screen drugs that might be helpful for a certain disease condition. We use these on Earth to make sure that we can reduce animal testing for pharmaceutical companies. So these are some of the kinds of things that drive the creative ways that we need to think about it. So as you guys are thinking about what problems you want to solve in the world, keep some of these things in mind. How do you miniaturize? How do you simplify? How is that going to make life better for everybody else? We also have to deal with lots of data. So we generate a huge amount of data on the space station, but our connection is like barely even 3G. So how do we get this data back down to the Earth? One of the really interesting cases with this was trying to identify bacteria on Earth. So we can take these swabs and we can go around the space station. It's like a Q-tip, and we can swab for bacteria. And we want to know this because, like, we don't want harmful bacteria growing in our environment. But before, it would take us 3 months to ship this bacteria back to Earth on a spacecraft and then analyze it. And so we figured out, is there a way that we can do all this analysis on board and just send the data back? And turns out that we can. So this is the very first DNA sequencing in space. This was the day that I did it. We're all pretty excited. This right here is the DNA sequencer. It's less than half the size of your phone. It generated terabytes of data. So I sequenced 2 billion base pairs on the space station. And so one of the things that we're really working on is how do we get the analysis and the technology right at the point of care. And so this is an interesting question if you think about things like a hospital. If you think about getting lab results back, if you go into the doctor and you want to test quickly, if you think about people that live in rural areas that can't access medicine, these kinds of things like detecting, identifying bacteria and shipping things back just as data are some of the problems that we're going to have to solve. And the last one is hard to reach places. So certainly space is a hard to reach place. But as I was doing all these experiments in space, some of my previous work, as you saw, was in the Democratic Republic of Congo. So I've lived in Africa off and on for a long time. I was doing virus research there. And this is a hard to reach place. It's a really hard place to do scientific work. We were doing a lot of disease work. So we were trying to help people who had diseases ranging from monkeypox to Ebola and prevent disease outbreaks. We were literally working on preventing pandemics before pandemics were a thing. And we still need to work on preventing pandemics. But as we're doing this research, trying to identify how we're going to get our lab equipment to these really hard to reach places is one of our big challenges. And so you can see, these are the medical supplies that we're loading up in the plane. We're taking this tiny plane out to the middle of the village. Well, I can't bring a giant piece of lab equipment with me. This is going to be the same challenge that we have when we go to the moon. So when astronauts go to the lunar surface, we're going to want to do this science and this technology. And you guys are the right age. If you want to be scientists and engineers, these are the questions that you're going to be working on. We need you in the lunar program, right? We're working really hard right now, but you guys are the age that if you go to school, you become an engineer, or you become the artist, or anything that's involved in that, the time that you're ready to graduate from college and to go into the workforce is the time that we're going to need you the most. It's not just the moon, it's also Mars. And so this is your time to influence the future of space. You can influence what humanity does as we leave Earth, and you can discover the wonders of the solar system and also help people back on Earth. So with that, I'd like to take your questions.
Students who are asking questions, come on down and we'll form a line on these stairs. All right, everybody, we're going to start our student questions. I'm going to Soren up first.
First, I'd like to start off saying thank you very much for being here. My name is Soren DeYoung. The question I have for you today is, what is the most extraordinary thing you have seen or learned on the International Space Station?
Thanks, Soren. There's a lot of incredible things, right? Every day is incredible things. I think the thing that stood out to me the most was on my first spacewalk. When you go out the door for the first time, like number one, it's terrifying, right? Your world gets really small. You're just focusing on what's right in front of you. Like number one, not falling off the space station. Number two, not breaking anything because it costs more than all the money you'll make in your lifetime and you can't pay NASA back. As you start to expand your awareness, the first thing that I really saw when I could look down on the planet was we were flying over Morocco. There's not a lot of clouds there and it's desert. And I could see just the continent of Africa and the bright sands in Morocco next to the bright blue of the ocean. And it was like nothing I've ever seen before. It was a really
Right.
Thanks.
Very much.
Hi, my name is Paloma Infante, and my question for you today was,
What inspired me to be an astronaut? So I wanted to be an astronaut when I was a kid, right? When I was 5, like, what do you want to do? And I said, I want to be an astronaut, a biologist, and a geologist. But like, that's really cute when you're 5, right? You're not gonna be an astronaut. This is not a thing. This is not a career. I got told this, like, you can't major in astronaut. Go find something else to do in college. And so I did biology. But I would follow space. I never really lost that interest in space. And I had a lab. I was a professor at MIT. I had a research lab. Things were going great. My friend called me one day and said, "There's astronaut applications online. Would it be fun if we applied?" And I said, "That would be hilarious. They're never going to take me. No worries." But they were an astronaut application. And be really, really careful what jobs you apply for, guys, because you might get them. So yeah, it was a combination of what I wanted to do as a child and then the opportunity to actually apply for it. So our cycle opens every 4 years. You need to have a college degree. We're looking forward to all of your applications soon.
Thank you.
Hi, Kate. My name's Madeline Chu, and my question for you is, what were some of the other experiments that your crewmates were working on when they were on the ISS?
Yeah, so some of the really cool experiments, not just the biology ones, are combustion. So when you look at a candle flame on Earth, it's kind of this teardrop shape. When you burn something in space, it actually is a sphere. Because if you think about on Earth, we've got these air molecules, and the lighter ones rise and heavier ones fall. That's based on heat. So the candle, all those light air molecules are rising. In space, air molecules are just floating. There's no convection. And so there's nothing to drive that flame upwards. So the flame expands outwards. And like, believe it or not, they let us burn things in space. This is an actual experiment. Everybody gets really excited about it. And we're studying how combustion happens. And so we're learning things about how to do cleaner combustion, about how to do fuel, about how we're going to work with rocketry and other ignition sources as we're going to the moon and we're doing fuel in space. Some of those things were just, it's amazing what you can do. And the kinds of questions that people have. I would never think to look at combustion in space. Scientists and engineers did.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, Kate. I hope it's not too weird being back here. I know you said that one of the scarier experiences while doing your spacewalks was breaking things. Was there anything else that came to mind specifically that was a fear for you?
Yeah, so the spacewalks are interesting because you're just at this higher level of risk, right? So you're inside the space station, you're already at risk. You can have micrometeoroid pierce the hole of the capsule. We recently lost a whole bunch of coolant out of one of our vehicles because it got hit by micrometeoroid debris. So that can happen at any time. We have to be ready for that. We have to be ready for that emergency. You could have a fire. Like, we've got the fire that are set on purpose. They're very well contained. If you got a fire that's not contained in space, this is terrible because fire consumes oxygen. So not only do you have to deal with the fire, you can't get away from it, and it's going to burn up all your oxygen. And then the last thing, which is some engineering decisions made 20 years ago, they decided to surround the spacecraft with a coolant that's ammonia. It's incompatible with human life. I'm like, you guys, what were we thinking? So if that ammonia leaks into the space station, you suffocate, you die. It's really horrible. And so these weren't things so much that were fears, but it's something that you think about all the time. It's something that you have to be prepared for. And one of the ways we really conquered that was through familiarity with it. If you ignore it, it's that problem, that boogeyman's going to get worse and worse. By understanding it and then by training, we felt that we could take care of that situation. And so it's a risk and it's a fear and it's always out there. But our crew had that confidence that we could handle any one of these situations if they would happen on the space station. Great question.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Landon, and I was wondering if you have any special walkout song or liftoff song?
We do, and because it was Russia, it's a Russian 80s rock anthem, which is kind of awesome. Yeah, and they play it every time the crew walks out from, you saw that video where we're at night and we're walking out from the place that we've been quarantining. And so it's just this history and it's this tradition. And so you hear it with every single crew. So sometimes we support the other crews and we see them do this. And then when it's your time to go to the Super Bowl of Space Olympics, we get to hear that song as we walk out. It's pretty cool.
Cool. Thank you.
I've never gotten that question before. I love it. Thank you.
Hi, my name's Francia, and my question is, how do you think the Artemis project will help people on Earth?
The Artemis project. So the Artemis program, this is our generation's answer to Apollo. So Artemis was a twin sister of Apollo. We're going to go back to the moon. It's going to do a few things. So this program is going to land the first woman and the first person of color on the moon. So when we went to the moon, it was in the 1960s. It was a really different era. And so we're doing things to make sure that the people on the moon represent the people in the United States. So that's the first thing. It's inspiring. You know, I talk to kids, I talk to kindergartners, and for them to see somebody that's like them, that's an astronaut, it really allows them to think about maybe that could be me someday. So I think it does a lot for kids and for education, and for helping people think about something a little bit bigger than themselves. It also really pushes the technology. So the moon is a lot farther than Earth. In order to get 250,000 miles away from Earth, we're only 450 miles away in low Earth orbit. To get there, we have to solve some engineering problems that we're working on every day at NASA. And so that's going to drive some technology forward that will probably be really beneficial to our lives on Earth in ways we don't know right now. Thank you.
Thank you. Hello, my name is Lily Andrews, and my question is, what are the benefits and challenges of being a woman astronaut?
A female astronaut, yeah. So the first challenge is the fact that when I get introduced as a female astronaut, right? Like, can I just be an astronaut? Wouldn't that be cool? So yeah, it's a thing. We have a lot of women in our astronaut corps, and so we're building up more and more women that have this capability to go to space. One of the challenges is the fact that people don't think it's something that's possible that they could do. So like people will limit themselves and limit their dreams and their goals. I'm kind of a moron, so I randomly applied, but I was even thinking in my head, like there's no way they're not going to take a female civilian biologist, right? So that's one of the challenges is just accepting that, you know, you can be confident, you can be strong, and you've got a place in the space program. And that's not just for the women. This is for everybody who doesn't quite fit in, right? You know, the mold of NASA is this male military fighter pilot. Like that's what we think of when we see an astronaut. But if you look at our astronaut corps, we don't look like that. We look like you guys. So that's one of the really big challenges that we have, is letting people know that we are just normal people, and that they can see themselves in this astronaut corps.
Hi, I'm Carson Campbell, and my question is, do you think we'll encounter any forms of life outside of Earth in the near future?
I like it. Life outside. So just to get it out of the way, I didn't see any aliens. I was looking, but I didn't see any. So I do think that there may be alien life in the universe. It's probably going to be microbial, would be my guess. So this is one of the really big reasons we're going to Mars. We're trying to see if there was ever life on Mars. So we may find life somewhere. It may not look at all like what we think life should be. And so that's a really interesting question too, is like, how do you even define life? There's a lot of scientists that are working on that. The driving force behind going to Mars is to try to figure out, is Earth unique? Do we have life elsewhere? So I think there's a possibility we could find it. But if you also think about the universe, you've got space and you've got time. So there could be life out there, but it could be so far away that we are never going to encounter it. And if you look at the James Webb Telescope, it's looking at the farthest reaches of our universe, but it's also looking back in time. So if you think about the billions of years that it took for our universe to be created, did we have life already? And it grew up and it decided to get in a war and bomb each other and we don't have it anymore. Is there life in the future? And then what are the chances that we encounter it? I think that gets pretty small, but NASA is studying what life might be like on exoplanets. So we're using telescopes to try to identify what planets would be similar to Earth and what would be hospitable to life. So we're really working on answering this question.
Awesome, thank you.
Hi, my name is Jackie, and I feel like you've kind of already answered my question, but what got you interested in space and the other fields that you work in?
Thanks, great question. So when I was 5, there was a really cool Napa County, I don't know if they still have it, but we would go to a park and people would set up telescopes. So this wasn't necessarily professional. These were amateurs that had telescopes, and they would invite kids and families to come in. So when I was 5, my parents took my family there, and I got to look at a telescope. And if you ever had a chance to look at a telescope and like look at Saturn, you can see rings of Saturn through a telescope. So I think as a 5-year-old, you know, that's a pretty big deal. That's an event, and that was the first thing that really got me interested in space.
Thank you.
Hi, Dr. Rubins. My name is Sean Johnson. I was just wondering, how do you feel that going to space sort of changed your perspective on the world when you returned, or maybe in broader terms, do you feel it changed any part of you as a person?
Yeah, you got some time to do some thinking in space, and it really is like a place to philosophize. You know, you're orbiting the Earth. You got to think about these big questions, and we do. And it's pretty funny because all the astronauts end up, you know, like really having some like meta-analysis of life, the universe, and everything. One of the things that a lot of people say is that, and there's actually a term for it. It's called the overview effect, and it's this idea that you are floating above the planet and you're looking down on this planet and you're orbiting it. And so you see, like when I see the United States, I don't see like a border at Canada and Mexico. You just see this North American landmass. Same thing for Europe, same thing for Asia. So you do not see where the countries begin and end. And you also see the Earth as this really small, fragile place. So you're looking, on one side, you're looking out into the blackness of the cosmos, and then you look back at Earth and it's this really little, small, glowing blue ball. There's a lot of thinking about like, oh my gosh, holy cow, that's our home. It's real tiny. There's a lot of nothing out there, and this is the only place that we have to live. You can look at the horizon and see what our atmosphere looks like, and it's this really thin layer of atmosphere. And so there's a lot of sense of like, this is this beautiful, amazing place, and we need to protect it. And we need to probably stop quibbling with other nations so much. So yeah, really grand things, world peace, etc. It's pretty awesome.
Thank you very much.
Hi, my name's Jack Hefner, and my question for you is, how does time work in space? Like, what time zone are you in, and how do you know when to go to sleep?
Yeah, that is a great question, right? Because we orbit every 90 minutes. So we got 16 sunrises and sunsets a day. How do you keep that from going all crazy? So we actually pick a time. We pick GMT, which is London time, because it's sort of halfway in between all these time zones like US, Japan, and Russia. So it kind of keeps everybody, they all have horrible hours at some point on their shifts. And it lets the astronauts synchronize to one specific time. And so we basically set our clocks and we set our calendars, and we just say, we're going to be on London time the entire mission, no matter where you are over the world. Great question.
Thank you.
Hi, my name's Bree, and my question is, how long does it take to get to the moon? And once you're there, how long will the mission scientists stay?
Oh, awesome question, because I'm working on this right now. So I'm actually working on the lunar spacesuits. This is my technical job, and we're talking about things like how many spacewalks are we going to do on the moon. So it's going to take us a while to get there. So it's going to take us up to, like, we don't know exactly the trajectory, between 11 and 17 days, because you can't just like launch off the Earth and aim for the moon with the gravitational body. So we actually have to go fly around the moon and use the human gravity to get in this orbit, and it takes a long time. And 250,000 miles takes a little while to get there. So we're going to spend a long time getting there. Once we get there, we're going to get in a lander and we're going to go down to the surface. And we think we're going to stay on the surface for a 6-day mission. So you have a landing day, you have launch off the moon day, and then you have your time to do spacewalks and do all the science in between. I literally have a meeting about this afternoon. So great question.
Hi, Dr. Rubins. My name is Christian Mills, and my question is, what technological advancements or innovations are necessary in order for the Artemis project to proceed?
Great question. Yeah, so Artemis is solving a lot of things, but it's got a lot of hurdles. Right now, probably one of the biggest things we have is the lunar lander. The first lunar lander is going to be designed by SpaceX. So, pretty cool vehicle. But one of the plans for this is to actually refuel in space. It's really hard to launch that much fuel on the planet. It's this paradox, right? The more fuel you have, the heavier the rocket, the harder it is to get to space, the more fuel you need. So the plan is to do 10 separate launches of the fuel that we need, to put it in an orbiting gas station, essentially, and then to refuel our lander in space. So in space cryogenic refueling. We've never done this before. It's not super easy. The rocket fuel has to be kept at these really, really cold temperatures so it can stay liquid. And so trying to figure out how to keep fuel super cold in space, keep it from evaporating, and make sure that we got 10 launches in a row to refuel is going to be one of our biggest technological challenges.
Thank you.
Hi, Kate. My name's Kenya, and I was wondering if there was any difference between the training for the ISS versus the training for the Artemis project.
Yeah, great question. ISS training is, we train a lot with our international partners, so we're going all around the world. That's probably not going to change very much, but what we train for is different. So we're training for our specific launch vehicle, and then we're training how to do all these experiments on the space station and how to do spacewalks. When we go to the lunar program, it'll be a similar theme for all of these, but the vehicles will be different. So we have a completely different spacecraft that's going to the moon. We're going to have to train a lot on that. We have a lander. This is the first time we've ever used this lunar lander, so we're going to spend a lot of time training on that. And then we're going to spend a lot of time training the crews in the lunar spacesuits. These lunar spacesuits, like, they're no joke. They're 400 pounds. You're in 1/6G, but you got to like move this giant thing around. You look like a transformer moving around the lunar surface. And so we got to train on how to do that, and we need to train a lot on geology. We're doing a lot of geology experiments there. So that's going to be some of the things that will be different from the space station.
Thank you.
Hi. Just kind of wondering, what was the process to becoming an astronaut like, and what made you want to work for NASA?
Yeah, so the process for becoming an astronaut is, like, first of all, you put your online application in, usajobs.gov. I'm telling you guys, every 4 years. So yeah, you put in your resume. And then they screen these thousands of applications that they get. You need letters of reference, and you need to have demonstrated experience in some of these specific technical fields. So they go through all of that, and then they end up getting it down to about 100 people, 120 people that we invite to NASA for an interview. It is the longest job interview I've ever had. It's a week long. You get to go live on site at NASA. And it's not just a job interview, it's a lot of medical tests as well. Then they bring a group of 60 finalists back, and you do another week-long interview. Then they make the selection. My class was 13 people. It was 9 US astronauts. And then you come together as a class and you start your training program. For other jobs at NASA, it starts similar. So there's a great, I think it's interns.nasa.gov. There's like one website that you can go to, and you can apply to be a NASA intern. Most of these are for college students. So as the ones that are older and graduating and thinking about going to university, when you're a college student, you can apply to work at any one of these NASA centers. And you don't have to work on astronaut stuff. You can work on satellites and geospatial imaging and Earth observations and climate change. So you put this application in. They have a committee that looks at intern qualifications and then tries to match you with your internship.
Well,
so in a few years, you can definitely apply for that one.
Hello, my question for you today is, what was something you looked forward to in space, but the outcome was not what you expected?
What was something I look forward to in space?
Yeah, and the outcome was not what you expected.
Oh, yeah, like something that really surprised me?
Yeah.
I was super surprised by, like, I was really excited about floating around. Like, before I went, my imagination was like, oh my gosh, floating is going to be great, and it's going to be amazing. I hadn't really thought through the fact about physics in space. So there's the whole everything's got an equal and opposite reaction. So for example, if I was in space and I was typing on the computer and I start typing, I'd push to type and I'd end up on the ceiling. Just a little bit of force. This propels you, right? So you're not just floating there like you're floating in a pool, you're actually stabilizing your body. So if you don't touch anything, you get like really unstable. There's all this motion all the time, and it's highly annoying to be doing this for your entire life. And so you learn a lot, not just how to float, but how to hold on to something, how to stabilize yourself. And then you learn how to fly. It's not intuitive. So like you throw a ball on the earth, you're going to launch it up a little bit to account for gravity. We think about this, it's subconscious, right? So in space station, you're thinking, I'm going to launch myself. You launch yourself up a little bit. And then again, close personal friend of mine gets a giant gash on her head because she ran her head into a hatch. So there's a lot about space floating and space flying that's actually a skill-based sport. I was pretty surprised. Great question.
Hi, Dr. Rubins. My name is Megan. And my question for you is, when you were here a student at Vintage, did you take classes that prepared you for being a scientist and an astronaut? And what electives did you take?
Awesome. Great question. Yes, I did. So Mr. Scrivener was my biology teacher and physics. And I took AP biology. And that's where I started getting really interested in science and things like PCR and DNA sequencing. We got to do some of those experiments in class. And so I think, a lot of that college preparatory type science classes were pretty influential in me wanting to become a scientist. I also took journalism, which was an amazing elective. That was a lot of fun, a lot of hard work. And I took foreign languages. So I took Spanish in high school, and then I took Spanish. I had to learn French at some point to go to Congo, and Russian later in life. And so the languages, again, they're hard classes, but it's a really cool things to do. And for you guys, the age that you're at, like take your languages now because your brains are nice, young, and plastic, and they'll learn the language. You try to go do it when you're 30 and you got to learn Russian, it's really hard. So take all the language that you possibly can is my advice.
Awesome. Thank you.
All right, everybody, before we finish here today, I just also want to give some recognition to Elena's Voice Foundation, which made the live streaming for all of our classrooms here at Vintage possible, as well as schools throughout NBUSD and even the county. So we are very much appreciative of that. And I need your help, everybody in here, to please thank Dr. Kate Rubins for being here today and this very special opportunity. So thank you so much. And the bell is going to ring in just a minute, and we'll go through both doors, and it will be break. And then there's a few students who are meeting me shortly. Thank you, everybody.
Yeah, it was very good. And I like that you wore your sweatshirt too.